B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Tuesday, October 16th, 2018. And I'm proud to originate every day from just outside of San Francisco, California. And I've managed to build a worldwide audience here at the Peter B. Collins podcast. Google says we have downloads in 71 countries. And so often I focus my coverage on national and international issues, often, mentioning San Francisco or California topics toward the end of the podcast. And today I'm going to flip the order a little bit because there's a critical case that was decided by a jury here in San Francisco this summer. The jury awarded $289 million to be paid by Monsanto Corporation, now merged into Bayer AG, a German conglomerate, because a man named Dwayne Johnson, who worked as a groundskeeper at a high school at a public school facility, he was exposed to Monsanto's Roundup, which contains the toxic ingredient glyphosate. And the jury, after carefully reviewing his case, decided that Monsanto was liable and included $250 million in punitive damages. That's how a jury sends a message to a corporate offender. But the judge in the case, a Superior Court judge named Suzanne Bolanos, and I've never heard of her before, she kept a very firm grip over this trial. According to the jurors, she was very careful. 35 prospective jurors were excluded during the opening proceedings. And she carefully instructed the jury and the jurors who were now protesting her intention to shave that verdict by hundreds of millions of dollars. They're saying, wait a minute, Your Honor. We followed your guidelines. We considered the evidence. We reached a verdict. And one of the jurors, a guy named Gary Kitahata, said, I urge you to respect and honor our verdict and the 6 weeks of our lives that we dedicated to this trial. Another juror, Robert Howard, said that the jury had paid studious attention to the evidence, closely followed the judge's instruction, deliberated for several days. The possibility that our unanimous verdict could be summarily overturned demeans our system of justice and shakes my confidence in that system. Now the judge has indicated that she is going to use her authority to roll back this verdict. She said that Dwayne Johnson's lawyers presented no evidence that any Monsanto employee had known or believed that its products could cause cancer. She believes their denials. Isn't that amazing? She also questioned whether California law authorized the jury's award of $1 million for each year of the lost life expectancy of Mr. Johnson. Now, these are issues that are ripe for appeal, and Monsanto has the right to appeal it. But the trial court judge should not be inserting herself here and making that determination. I do not believe that that is within her purview. Well, we're going to see how it plays out. Now, what's interesting is that rocker Neil Young, who lives south of San Francisco in the community called La Honda, he attended the trial on several days. And he and his new partner, Darryl Hannah, co-authored an op-ed that appeared in Monday's San Francisco Chronicle. Let me quote a few lines from Young and Hannah. We were among the millions of citizens who felt a surge of optimism that justice might actually prevail on August 10th when a San Francisco court jury awarded a historic $289 million verdict against the agrochemical conglomerate Monsanto. On Wednesday, we learned that the judge is considering taking away that jury award for punitive damages. We were so captured by Mr. Johnson's battle that we traveled to San Francisco to watch the trial. Would democracy finally prevail, or would Monsanto again find a way to subvert the justice system? Now, it's interesting to note that the latest release from Neil Young is called The Monsanto Years, and the title track, where he refers to them repeatedly as Monsanto, I'm not sure why, is a pretty powerful anthem. Now, Neil Young and Darryl Hannah note that Judge Bolanos unseated 35 jurors, including many who said that they could be fair and impartial. The 12 who issued the verdict were those who showed no predisposition against Monsanto. During trial, the judge consistently sided with the company on evidentiary objections. Judge Bolanos deemed any mention of Monsanto's genetically modified crops off limits. She forbade Johnson's lawyer from showing the jury Monsanto's internal studies showing that Roundup caused kidney tumors in mice, that the chemical easily penetrates the body through the skin, that Monsanto had a flim-flam system in place for killing unfavorable scientific studies by independent and government scientists. Judge Bolanos even gave a curative instruction telling the jury Monsanto had never manufactured Agent Orange. That statement was simply not true. However, the judge deemed the instruction necessary to neutralize potential bias from statements made about Agent Orange by dismissed jurors in front of the other jury members. So this shows me, some of these details don't even pop up in the San Francisco Chronicle's coverage of this case. And this shows me that Neil Young and Darryl Hannah paid very close attention, and they're not bad writers either. Oh, and by the way, I forgot, they got married in July. I thought they were just cohabitating, but they have tied the knot. Now, here is a separate report I got from EcoWatch yesterday. Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, has been found in the urine of 93% of the American public during a unique testing project that started in 2015. Don't you feel good about that? Hey, when you're outside and you need to take a leak, just imagine that you're helping to kill some weeds with the Roundup in your pee. Another case here in San Francisco that deserves attention relates to female immigrants who are pregnant and who seek an abortion. Now, there is a separate case, I want to be clear about this, that actually put the case I'm talking about on hold for a while. That separate case was when the Trump administration blocked access to abortion for a Jane Doe migrant teen woman, and this popped up in the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. That is a separate case, and I want to make that clear. The one I'm talking about was brought by the ACLU during the Obama administration, challenging a practice that when immigrant minors in government-funded shelters request an abortion, many of them were sent to facilities controlled by Catholic charities, and Catholic charities refuse to allow abortions or contraception in their care. The federal judge in this case, Magistrate Laurel Beeler, said that while she didn't take a position on the issues of access to abortion, she said ACLU had suffered no harm, lacked legal standing to bring the case, and that Catholic groups have allowed these minors to be transferred to other shelters with no restrictions. But to me, this is a clear barrier to access to abortion care, and the ACLU may amend the suit to bring individual plaintiffs that would address the judge's rejection of the organization's standing to bring the case. I mentioned last week that Mark Benioff, who is the billionaire chief of Salesforce, has broken ranks with the other tech billionaires in San Francisco and supports a ballot measure called Prop C. And Prop C would place a tax on the biggest companies in San Francisco that would raise about $300 million to address homeless response. And I commend Mark Benioff. I don't know a lot other things about him, and I don't take a position that he is a saint, but he is showing real leadership on this issue. And this has caused the eruption of a Twitter war with the CEO of Twitter. Yeah, Jack Dorsey has been using his platform to talk back and forth with Mark Benioff. So, Jack says, I want to help fix the homeless problem in San Francisco and California, but I don't believe that Proposition C is the best way to do it. I support Mayor London Breed and her commitment to address this the right way. And Mark Benioff says, Homelessness is all of our responsibility, which is why we're supporting Prop C. Together as one San Francisco, we can take on the city's most challenging problem. And then Benioff goes directly to Jack Dorsey. And he says, "Hi, Jack. Thanks for the feedback. Which homeless programs in our city are you supporting? Can you tell me what Twitter and Square and you are in for? And at what financial levels? How much have you given to Heading Home, our $37 million initiative to get every homeless child off the streets?" So, while typically when billionaires are pissing on each other, I tend to just get out of the way, in this case, right on Mark Benioff. One other story from the streets of San Francisco, which are clogged with cars that have those Uber and Lyft decals on them. And a new study by the city of San Francisco confirms that fully half of the increase in traffic congestion over the last 10 years can be attributed to these app-based, unlicensed taxi services. And 51% is the estimated contribution to the increased delay. The others have to do with the strong economy and the shifts in the population. That confirms a phenomenon that I have witnessed with my own eyes on the streets of San Francisco. Also want to mention a good op-ed in Sunday's New York Times written by Alex Rosenblatt, who has a book coming out called Uberland, How Algorithms Are Rewriting the Rules of Work. And he notes that the people who work for Uber are essentially under surveillance whenever they are on the app. And yet they have no human supervisors that they can call or interact with when there's a problem with a passenger or other issues come up. And this reminds me of the way that smartphones, GPS, and smart applications have enabled employers like UPS and FedEx to essentially imprison their workers. And they can monitor their actions. You see a UPS truck, you see that driver jamming for it, and watch the way they get in the truck. They are instructed to put their seatbelt on before they start the motor, because it saves a little gas for UPS. And the app that they carry will report them if they start the engine before they put the seatbelt on. Now, that's just one example. I've talked to some of the drivers in Brown and a couple of FedEx folks as well, and it is amazing how digital monitoring has changed the workplace in this country. Yesterday, I lamented that Senator Elizabeth Warren had decided to try to take on the attacks from Donald Trump, the Pocahontas racist digs, and I believe this has backfired. Now, it's not exactly what I predicted. My concern was that by engaging a bully and a demagogue, you only egg them on. And that happened. Trump, of course, is gloating on Twitter how this DNA test shows that, in fact, she may have less Native American blood than the average white citizen. And then the Cherokee Nation spoke up. 6 years ago, they were kind to Elizabeth Warren, and they didn't really challenge the issues related to her ancestry. The chief of the Cherokee Nation at the time, Bill John Baker, said Warren never claimed to be a member of the Cherokee Nation. She only claimed Native ancestors. And he gently said, "I wish every congressman and senator in the U.S. had a kinship or felt a kinship to the Cherokee Nation." Now, Baker is only 1/32nd Cherokee, and I don't purport to know what the official standard should be. But it is fair to say that Warren has never claimed to be part of an Indian tribe or population, only that she has this kind of ancestry. So, the new Secretary of State of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin, responded this way: "A DNA test is useless to determine tribal citizenship. Now, she's not claiming citizenship, but this is his response. Current DNA tests do not even distinguish whether a person's ancestors were indigenous to North or South America. Sovereign tribal nations set their own legal requirements for citizenship, and while DNA tests can be used to determine lineage, such as paternity to an individual, it is not evidence for tribal affiliation. Using a DNA test to lay claim to any connection to the Cherokee Nation or any tribal nation, even vaguely, is inappropriate and wrong. Senator Warren is undermining tribal interests with her continued claims of tribal heritage. And so, I do understand what Elizabeth Warren was attempting to do. And I don't think it worked on the issue of her ancestry, and it raises bigger questions as well. Over at The Intercept, a good piece, a very, I think, fair critique by Brianna Gray, points out that the central issue is that when she got hired at Harvard, she taught in Texas, then in Pennsylvania, then went to Harvard, they classified her as a Native American and claimed her as a minority. And who's responsible for that? At this point, I can't tell you. But this article writes, the only issue from an ethical perspective is that Warren held herself out as Native American, allowing Harvard Law School to use her as cover for its impotent diversity efforts. And that's a part of the other aspect of this squabble. Was she recruited at the time that Harvard was desperately trying to diversify? And, of course, there was one law professor who had gone on a long-term leave and said he wouldn't come back until there was greater diversity on the law school staff. And when that didn't change and he asked to extend his leave, he was dismissed by Harvard University. The other issues that come up, I've met Elizabeth Warren. I've heard her speak several times in person. She is really inspiring and a great leader on domestic economic issues. And her role in setting up the Consumer Protection Financial Board, I think I got those in the wrong order, Consumer Financial Protection Board, how about that, is something I respect. And again, when she talks about domestic issues, I look to her for leadership. But bringing up this issue of her claim of Native ancestry only emphasizes that she was silent on the Keystone XL pipeline. She was silent on the Standing Rock protests, and she remains silent on the protests that are underway today down on the bayou in Louisiana, where they're protesting the final section of the pipeline that will bring tar sands from Canada to the Gulf for export. The 160-mile Bayou Bridge pipeline is causing activists to lock themselves to construction equipment. They have forced construction delays by kayaking up to work sites, dangling from trees on makeshift platforms to delay clear cutting. And Elizabeth Warren, she's nowhere to be found. Not only that, on foreign policy, Elizabeth Warren has a lot of work to do. And Andrew Bacevich, who I consider to be one of the leading scholars on American foreign policy today, he is a retired Army colonel. He taught history at Boston University. He's been a guest on this podcast many times, and I have great respect for Bacevich. At Tom Dispatch today, he wrote a love letter. It runs almost 9 pages to Elizabeth Warren, who represents him. He lives in Massachusetts. And he gently suggests to her that she develop some foreign policy and a Warren doctrine. And he even tries to populate it with some ideas of his own to address climate issues, to address cyber warfare, and to deal with other sets of issues related to our status in the world today. But he doesn't even bring up Israel, Palestine. He's very generous to her. And I believe that he is trying in a positive way to remind her that if she's going to become the first woman president, she better have some clear answers on foreign policy. I've linked to Bacevich's piece. You can read it. The link is in the show file at peterbcollins.com. And every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work with your subscriptions to the PBC podcast. People like the incredible Faith Peoples, Ethan Knox, Andrew Rush, and Stuart. I'm sorry, Stuart, but your last name got lopped off by the printer here. Stuart, you know who you are, and I'm grateful to you. So I'd like you to join these fine folks. All you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and it's easy, $5, $10, $20 a month. With the $50 annual subscription, you earn a bonus gift. I'll send you a copy of John Dist's new rock and roll CD called American University, and I'd love to get that out to you today, so don't delay. MSNBC has recently discovered that Republicans try to win elections through election fraud. And they use their power over state agencies, like the Secretary of State in Georgia, who is running for governor, who is busy burying absentee ballot applications in file drawers and using an array of tactics to purge voters and block African Americans from supporting Stacey Abrams, the black woman who is running for governor of Georgia. And last night, to her credit, Rachel Maddow did a great job. It was highly repetitive in her style, but she exposed how Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota won a narrow victory 6 years ago based on votes from Indian reservations in North Dakota. And since then, the North Dakota Republicans have tightened up the regulations, and they are using this pretext that the Indian Nation IDs that are required for these Native Americans to vote don't have street addresses on them, because on reservations they don't have streets and they don't have house numbers. And so they are going to block a whole group of people from voting because their IDs don't include a street address. Now, the Native American tribes are issuing new IDs. They are making up streets and addresses to try to fulfill the pretextual demands of the state legislature and the governor. But this is just one example of how in tight races, and Heidi Heitkamp's race isn't even tight this year. She's down more than 10 points. In Georgia, the Abrams-Kemp race is within 2 points with Abrams ahead. But the voter suppression gambits will likely offset the polling lead that Abrams has today. And my colleagues at Who, What, Why are doing a great job covering these issues today. They report on a lawsuit by 5 Georgia residents, voters, who have taken on Secretary of State Brian Kemp and the Board of Elections related to the handling of absentee ballots. And here in my county in California, people are voting by mail at the rate of 73%. I still insist on going to my precinct and casting my ballot, and I'm an endangered species. I'm an oddball. So I've linked to the Who, What, Why story. They are also reporting that the electronic voting machines, that of course are unverifiable, cannot be audited, cannot be recounted. They're not only vulnerable in that manner, but security of the machines as the early voting begins is so lax that they have photographs of these voting machines in unsecured rooms, and they're visible through a window to the street. And so it goes. Yes, many people who have faith in the system and who will turn out to vote are going to come up losers on Election Day because of election fraud, not voter fraud. And there's a new book just released by Carol Anderson, the celebrated professor of African American Studies at Emory University in Atlanta. I've requested a copy of the book and an interview with the professor. It's called One Person, No Vote: How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. And I heard part of her interview on Democracy Now! Today, where she posits that the election was stolen for Trump in Wisconsin and Florida. Now, in my discussions with Greg Palast and others, I have focused on Wisconsin, but Michigan as opposed to Florida. So I'm very interested in reading her book and interviewing her to get those details about how the election was rigged for Trump, not by Russians, by good old Americans who called themselves Republicans here in 2016. You heard earlier this year about a New York Times reporter, a fresh hire named Ollie Watkins. and how the FBI demanded and got all of her phone accounts, her records, her emails, as they pursued charges against a Senate Intelligence Committee staff member named James Wolfe. And the New York Times did not go to bat for Allie Watkins. They didn't run editorials thumping their chests about the potential intrusion on the rights of a free press. No. They basically downplayed the story, and when they covered it, they were kind of embarrassed about the role that Allie Watkins played in this case. Now, we understand that she had an affair with James Wolfe, a married man, and Allie Watkins is in her late 20s, as I understand it. And I don't judge that. It's not my issue. But today, Jim Wolfe took a guilty plea to a single charge of making false statements to federal agents. And the false statements were related to whether he lied about feeding information to reporters. Now, the lawyers go to great lengths to tell us that this plea deal was not based on any information that Watkins may have gotten from her lover, Jim Wolfe. And I'll take that as it's represented. Her lawyer said it's important to note that Wolfe's plea deal did not involve anything related to Allie Watkins. So I guess that case is closed. I don't know if Allie Watkins will return to the news pages of the New York Times. Julian Assange has some new conditions on his occupancy of his hideout at the Embassy of Ecuador in London, England. Now, Ecuador has released his phone to him, and he is permitted to use a single phone and computer for personal communications. But he is banned from using those devices for political activity or interfering with the internal affairs of other states. Now, Ecuador also told him in a memo that he is prohibited from using or installing unauthorized equipment, and that if he does so, any attempt will be reported as a security breach and reported to competent British authorities. In addition, they said that he has to take charge of the well-being, feeding, hygiene, and proper care of his pet cat. I guess the Ecuadorians believe he has not been a good shepherd to his kitty cat. And they're also telling him he needs to clean the bathroom and secure routine medical care at his own expense. So I guess he's not leaving anytime soon. Now to the case that is dominating the corporate media coverage these days, the allegations that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered at the consulate of the Saudi Kingdom in Istanbul last week. Well, the latest we have is that Mike Pompeo is there in Riyadh. He met with the royal family. He's going next to Turkey. And we're told that the Turkish investigators who were finally allowed into the consulate on Monday and Tuesday found toxic materials and materials being removed by painting over them. But we don't have any further information on the reports that an Apple Watch recording captured the interrogation and murder of Mr. Khashoggi. We also have heard rumors that the Saudis are going to float a face-saving story that, gosh, they sent these people to interrogate him and they just went too far and accidentally killed him. Nobody, based on what we've heard so far, nobody's going to believe that story. But, gosh, Trump lies 80% of the time at his rallies, and we're getting used to this kind of just new normal, that people can say whatever they want and just kind of leave it at that. Now, we're also learning from two conflicting stories in the New York Times today that Saudi Arabia could reduce its oil exports, shut down the pumps, and that this could cause a recession in the West. It could also undermine the plots of the Trump administration in cahoots with the Netanyahu government in Israel to impose new sanctions as early as November 5th on the nation of Iran. And, of course, part of that is to block any oil exports by Iran, and you cut off those exports and the Saudis cut back, prices could go up, and it could lead to a worldwide recession. So that's in one article in the New York Times today. And that was written, by the way, by David Sanger, their Washington bureau chief. Then you go to a story with the bylines of Clifford Krauss and Rick Gladstone, saying that, asking the question, how much leverage do the Saudis have in terms of oil cutbacks or shifting their arms purchases from the U.S. to another country? And they basically say, no big deal. Saudi oil represents less than 5% of American supplies today. We have reduced our dependency from 1.4 million barrels a day from Saudi Arabia to a mere 800,000. And given the expansion of U.S. oil production under the guy who was fighting climate change, Barack Obama, they're basically arguing in the second article, don't worry about it. That's our New York Times. Just a little contradiction goes a long, long way. Then we turn to Consortium News, where I credit Joe Laria, the new editor who took the place of the late, great Robert Perry, and he published a piece by a professor from here in California who I'm not aware of, Asad Abu Khalil, a Lebanese-American professor of political science at California State University, Stanislaus. And he reveals the truth about Jamal Khashoggi, that he was no critic of the Saudi regime, he was a protector of it. And he wasn't a journalist, he was a propagandist who worked for the royal family. In particular, he worked for Prince Turki Al Faisal, who headed Saudi intelligence, and his brother, Prince Khalid Al Faisal, who owned the newspaper Al Watan, where Khashoggi had his first job as an editor. And the professor here says Khashoggi distinguished himself with an eagerness to please and an uncanny ability to adjust his views to those of the prevailing government. While the Western media portray a courageous investigative journalist upsetting the Saudi regime, nothing is further from the truth. There is no journalism in Saudi Arabia. There's only crude and naked propaganda. Khashoggi admitted to an Arab reporter last year in an interview from Istanbul that in Saudi Arabia he had been both an editor and a censor. And the professor continues, Khashoggi was a reactionary. He supported all monarchies and sultanates in the region and contended they were reformable. To him, only the secular republics, such as Iraq, Syria, and Libya, defied reform and needed to be overthrown. So you can read the full column for yourselves. I've linked to it in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Now, Donald Trump says that he wants to tighten up the libel laws and the defamation laws so that he can sue people who write things that he doesn't like. But he is celebrating the lax defamation laws that we have in this country right now because a federal judge tossed out Stormy Daniels' lawsuit alleging that Trump defamed her in a tweet when he challenged her story that in 2011 she was harassed by a man in the parking lot at her gym to remain silent about Donald Trump. And the judge in the case, I think, had to stretch things quite a bit, because James Otero, the federal judge, said that the tweet in question involved a public official and a matter of public concern. And the question here is whether Stormy Daniels is a public figure. She sued under her real name, Stephanie Clifford. And Stephanie Clifford is not a porn actress, is not a common name, is not a public figure, in my opinion. But Otero said that Trump's statement constituted rhetorical hyperbole that is protected by the First Amendment. Really? And finally today, Hillary Clinton was able to dodge for decades any accountability about Bill Clinton's dalliances, the Monica Lewinsky affair, and her own role in denouncing the so-called bimbos who erupted inconveniently at times during the Clinton campaign and 2 terms in the presidency. Well, on Sunday, Hillary was asked about it on a CBS interview, and pointedly, was not Bill's relationship with Monica Lewinsky an abuse of power? And, in retrospect, do you think Bill should have resigned? Absolutely not, Hillary said. It wasn't an abuse of power, asked the interviewer. No, she said. And then she shifted to wondering why the media is not investigating Donald Trump. And there's a good commentary, I've linked to it, at The Guardian today, under the byline of Suzanne Moore. And she says, yes, Hillary is right to say that Trump should be investigated, but this does not excuse her husband. Back during the late 90s, Moore writes, I could not understand the feminist support for Hillary. Now I see it clearly. This was a feminism for entitled, privileged women. Other kinds of women were dispensable. Now it is Lewinsky who emerges with class, and Hillary with a blind spot so big that she never did get the prize she felt entitled to. That's diplomatically said, and I agree with it. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.